The path of an artist is full of challenges, which has pushed me to reach out to other professionals about their experiences. Join us as we explore the journeys of fine artists who have turned their passion of creating art into a profession. From their highs to their hurdles, these are real insights, breakthroughs, and triumphs to inspire other creators to reach higher. Welcome to the Business of Art Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Business of Art Podcast. This week we have a special guest, Richie Carter, who has been just killing it lately, and he's a pretty young guy, so we're excited to have him. I'm going to start off by reading his bio, and we're going to go from there, so just bear with me here. All right, so Richie Carter was born and raised just outside of Kalispell, Montana. Being brought up in a rural community of northwest Montana, he developed an early sense of adventure and creativity, as one does when the woods are your only playground. As a child, if he didn't have a pencil or crayon in his hand, he was building or making the latest idea he could conjure up, from tree houses to papier-mâché sculptures, etc. As Richie moved through school, it soon became apparent that he had a knack for drawing and painting. His high school art classes served as an inspiring foundation to his fascination with realism and working from direct observation. Just like many artists of the field, he quickly became infatuated with the works of the old masters, and while obtaining his BFA in painting from the University of Montana, he spent a year abroad in northern France studying the language, culture, and the rich tradition of painting. Upon graduating in 2012, Richie has established his base once again in Kalispell, where he works from his studio. All right, Richie, I know there's a lot more that goes into your story here, but welcome to the podcast. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. When you asked me, I was like, I think I responded like immediately, which I usually wait a little bit. I'm like, I gotta think about this. It's like, no, I want to do it. So I'm stoked to be here, and I think it's a great thing that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I think you'll have some really great, insightful tips and tricks, and just I think your journey in general is going to be really valuable for people to hear, especially from a younger artist. I think it's really inspiring what you're doing. So to get started, we would love to hear your journey. We kind of got a little taste of it from your bio. Please share, kind of how you got started and all some of those formative experiences leading up till now and that whole journey.
So, grew up in, like I said, rural little town with like 100 kids from K to 8th grade school, one post office, a store, and a gas station, and 2 bars, maybe 3 bars. I just grew up in the mountains in the woods on a lake, and was just running around, just like I said, I've always loved creating things. It didn't matter what it was. As I kind of went through school, I was like, I can draw. I like drawing. And my high school art teacher really was like the most instigating, like inspiring driving force for me to actually want to do art. And even like more so than college, like college nearly made me quit art. And I feel kind of like, I don't want to diss on my college experience. It was just a really big struggle for me of where I was in life and what I actually wanted to get out of an art education. It wasn't what I thought, and wasn't what I was like, dreaming or thinking an art education would be. So after high school, I just go into the regular university system. I started in San Diego, actually, but then transferred to the University of Montana. It's known for having an art department, and I get in there, and it was all, postmodern, conceptually based art approach, which 10 years later, oh God, I think it's been longer than 15 years, 2012, just over 10 years later, I am actually really thankful and grateful for that experience. I didn't learn the techniques I did really want to learn how to draw and learn how to paint and like use oil painting to make realistic images of things, and it just wasn't taught. There's a couple classes where they're like, okay, figure draw, but there was just like no instruction. It just wasn't. It wasn't what was really valued there. And a lot of my classes, kids would start making fun of landscape paintings that were in a gallery and like make fun of realism, and it was just like really off-putting to me. So I just butted heads a lot of the time in school and ended up graduating. And upon graduating, and this is a story that I was like, some of the other questions you have, I'm like, this was a moment where I'm like, I truly almost just quit, like in a rage on my, like the day before graduation, I think it was. We put our senior thesis show up. We've worked a whole year on this body of work. It's our first like kind of chance of this is what it's going to be like to be a real working artist. You're going to create a body of work that's cohesive, and you're going to put it in a gallery. You're going to have an opening, and it's going to be beautiful, and you're going to be, you know, hopefully feel so accomplished of what you've created. And we put it up, and we had a visiting guest artist she was from New York at the time, and they're like, we should have her critique the show. And so she comes in and critiques the show, and she gets to my paintings, which are landscape paintings, and she was so upset. And,
really?
oh my God, like it was crazy. She actually, like, she spent like a couple minutes on each person. It's like, oh, that's cool. What if you did that? Great. Nice work. Let's go. She gets to mine. She's like, the first thing she said was, whose are these? And I was like, they're mine. And she just like lit into the paintings and into me.
Wow.
For like 10, maybe 15 minutes. She just like wouldn't stop. And I kept trying to like defend myself. And at first everybody's kind of like giggling and laughing. My whole class was there, and all the professors. And at first they're kind of like, ha. And then they were like, oh, she's like for real. Like this is personal and
wow,
serious. And she is offended greatly by these images that I've painted. And I'm trying to like defend myself. Like, oh yeah, I actually painted them to be like a moving photograph. That's why they're thin and like blurred. And she's like, you don't even know how to paint. Like there's no buildup of anything. These look like they're thrift store paintings. And how old are you? These look like an 80-year-old painted them. You must have an old soul. She just like started like attacking me. And then everybody obviously just made no noise. And I just sat there and took it for, I mean, maybe it was only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity.
Yeah.
And then that whole time I'm just like, and I'm like I'm very nice. I'm very like reserved. I'm very sensitive too. So I just like kept it. And it was just like this like anger building up, like that rage where you're like, I'm going to like have rage, crying, tears, and just like, but I like held it in, and we got done. We had a couple more people to do afterwards. I like stormed out, and I'm like, the show's tomorrow. I'm going to rip down all my paintings tonight. I'm going to throw them in the dumpster behind the gallery. And screw it. Like, I'm done. I didn't want to make art. Yeah, I tried to do what they wanted me to and make some, compelling story and thesis statement behind this whole show. And look where it got me. So all my professors came and they talked to me, and friends were like, Richie, it's really good. Don't throw it away. Like, it's okay. She's just, just trying to like make me feel better. I'm like, this sucks. Like, screw this. I've hated everything here, And luckily I didn't.
Yeah.
I did do the opening. I kept it up, but I did persevere and just was like, I can tell the story. It's kind of funny. Like it's almost comical, but it was just like so outrageous of how she critiqued. And the teachers were like, you actually got the best critique because she actually stayed on your work and you got something out of her. I'm like, I don't know if I buy that. Like, I'm not trying to give it that. Like, I want people to recognize beauty.
Yeah.
And that's not what happened.
Yeah.
So that was like my like, all right, you're going to be an artist. And I actually decided, I'm like, well, I think I'm going to focus on ceramics, which here's a new ceramic cup I just made. I've just got back into it, which I absolutely love. But and then I started painting a little bit, and I'm like, okay, I want to kind of plein air paint, because I hadn't really used oils. I only started the year before. And then a landscape painter from Utah came up to Montana, and a friend was like, you need to take this workshop. Like, I think you can get in. I think you'd really like him, and he would really, enjoy having you. And his name is John Poon. And I learned more that week. I learned more in that week of like technicalities of painting and image making than I did in all of the university, including being in France, which was the same kind of school. And I was like, oh my God, all of a sudden I had this like vocabulary for these things that I was trying to figure out myself. So I took a week with him, and then 6 months go by, I think, and I took a second one. He came back again, and then a year went by, and I took a third one. So within like 3 weeks of instruction with him, I like gained so much, and then I just started painting on my own, and nature kind of became my teacher, and I was just like plein air painting, and did a couple shows at a local gallery, sold a bunch of the paintings, and they were like, $100, and I was like, I don't know, that seems like too much to charge, and then just kind of went from there. And then after that point, I got the support from my family, my parents, who now are my absolute biggest fans, but they were like, Richie, you really should try to do something. Like, how long are you going to make coffee in a cafe? And it's like, I want to be a painter. I want to do this. So I just went for it full time, and then met Ken like pretty early on, Ken Yaris, and we teamed up. And I think that was the year I would have met you, because we went to the Out West, or what was it called at that point? Out West Art Show, maybe, in Great Falls.
Probably.
And Ken and I met there. We met there because we went to high school together, and we're like, hey, we're kind of both doing the same thing. Like, let's share a studio. So now this awesome studio space we have here is what we still share.
That's awesome.
And we're still both making paintings despite all the years together of being like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like, I don't know if it's working, and just being like, no, you got this, keep going. So we kind of have both spurred each other on and helped with a lot of those down times throughout the years. But I don't know, it's just like, just kept painting. That was the main thing. Just keep painting and trying to observe, and here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think to kind of bring this even further, right now, you've been preparing really, really heavily for this show with it's Arcadia Gallery, right?
Arcadia Contemporary,
in New York City. Tell us about that show, like how that all came about. Like, I want to hear all the details. So
this is something like I would like to impart on anybody who's kind of just starting out. Like, my art career, even since the very beginning of like, I actually, like, leaving high school, I got the most random scholarship to study art specifically, and it was like, ever since that happened, like, weird serendipitous things seem to just like kind of fall into place. And it doesn't mean it's all just been easy and like smooth sailing and I know exactly where I'm going and what's next, but I've just kind of followed these opportunities that have presented themselves, whether they're big, huge, I got the scholarship, to just like little things of like, oh my gosh, I took this workshop from this person, 5 days changed my life, So just following those has been really, really significant. And this show, which is called To Prepare Oneself in French, it's a French term. It's called Se Préparer, and it all fell into place in a very similarly serendipitous way. A year ago, I was in New York City for a group tonalist society show at the Salmagundi Club, and I had 4 paintings in it, and there's 30 artists or something in the show. So it's just a few works, and I had one free day in the city, and I just went walking. I'm like in upper, like mid Manhattan, and I just started walking south. I'm like, I kind of want to go out to Soho because I've heard it's kind of cool area. I start walking, and it's like miles and miles, and all of a sudden I'm in this kind of quiet. I'm walking down Broadway, and there's this quiet area. It's like Soho. I'm like, oh, I'm there, and I look across the street, and I see Arcadia on this building, and I'm like, that must be like Arcadia Gallery.
Wow.
That's got to be it. So I walk in, and I'm like, oh, sweet, it is. And I see like some of my favorite painters. I really want to see some of Alex Venezia's paintings, and they were on the wall, and I'm like looking at them, like, oh, this is awesome. Oh. And there's nobody in the gallery except in this back office. I see a man at his desk, and on the desk behind him is a Tim Reese painting, and I know Tim, and I was like, oh, that must be a Tim Reese painting. And the guy turns around, and he looks at me, or he looks up. I can't remember if his back was facing me. Anyways, he looks up, and he's like, why do I know you? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm a painter. My name's Richie Carter. And he's like, oh my gosh, I just saw an image of yours on social media of you holding a painting of Paris. Like, what are you doing with that painting? And I was like, oh, it's actually, that's the reason I'm here. It's going into a show at the Salvagundi Club. He's like, okay, well, if the paintings don't sell, like, I would gladly bring them and, have them at the gallery and try to sell them for you and have them here. That's such an amazing painting. I was like, oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Sounds awesome. So a couple days later, the show goes by and I sell all of them and got an award there. And it was like this really amazing experience. And so I, call Steve up and I'm like, well, good and bad news. All the paintings have sold, but I can't give you any. And so he was like, well, can you paint some more for our summer group show in August? And I was like, it's March. I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that. So I paint 4 paintings. And honestly, like, part of my own painting journey is, if you've seen my paintings, they're very moody. They're very like emotive and emotional. Yeah. And, like this year in particular has been like the hardest emotional and mental year for me to date. And so when I painted this one painting for this group show, it's this little 11 by 14, and it was like a study that I wanted to eventually paint larger, which I have for this show. Yeah. But I painted it on a day. Ken was in the studio, Tyler Murphy was in the studio, and I was so low and was just like I've had some like low like times, but that day I was just like so low, and they're painting, and I was like, well, I guess I'll paint, because I'm just gonna sit here. And I painted this painting. I didn't realize that painting would like kind of also change my life, because when it got put into the show, it also went completely viral on Instagram. Oh. And like truly went viral, and I had so many people wanting this painting, and so I just directed him to the gallery. And so he had this just waterfall of emails coming in for these paintings, and sold them, and then was like, hey, what do you think about doing a solo show? And I was like, let me think. Yes, let's do it. And it was supposed to be in 2025. And we kind of planned out, we're going to do this group show, then do it twice, get your name kind of built up, and then have a solo show. And then in November, I get a call, and I'm in Europe again to do this group show, and I get a call or email from the owner, and he's like, so an opening came up in May 2024. People really want your work. I think we should strike while the iron's hot. And at that time, I still had a solo show in December that I had signed up for, and I hadn't even like done the work yet. This was October. So I was like, there's no way. Like, I still have to paint a solo show of landscapes for December. And I just told him no. I was like, no, I can't do it. And then I sat for a week, and I'm like, gosh, I know I could do it. I don't have anything else like really like, it's going to take everything I have, but I'm going to, all right, I'm going to say yes. So I email him back. I'm like, all right, actually, if it's still open, let's do it. And he's like, good, I'm glad you said that. So then it was on, but I didn't have time I didn't get to start really the paintings till January, February. And I don't want to say this to tell people like I painted these paintings quickly, or to brag about it, or to like say it and diminish the quality of the work, right? Because what I have put into this work in the last 3 months is like, I've never done that before. Like, I've never put as much of myself into something to complete it, and also to complete it to a degree where I'm actually excited about all the paintings. I'm not like, because I'm my harshest critic. And so for me to actually like be proud of the pieces is saying something that I'm like, wow, I'm learning to be nicer to myself. That's awesome. Which is one to your other question. Another question you've had is like, that's what I would tell anybody who's starting, like, be so much kinder and compassionate to yourself. Like, if I could go back and tell my younger self something, that would be one of the biggest things. So here I am. I'm excited with the work. It's been really a joy to actually paint the paintings, but to make myself show up. Like I said, it's been really hard emotional year that I've never had a harder time to show up to the easel. But once I've shown up and actually get into the paintings, that's been like this time of that I feel peace and I feel totally in focus. My mind can be in the present, and then I finish and I go to bed, and the next day I have to like do it again and get myself like, all right, show up, get into it. I know you don't want to, but do it. And I just did that every day, and I had multiple like 14-hour painting days, which is not good. I mean, I don't want to like glorify that practice because it's not balanced and it's not how I actually want to healthily move forward and create art, but I just had to in this time, and to learn how much more capable you are of things than you give yourself credit for. So the show opens in a week from Thursday on May 9th, and I can't believe it all came together.
Yeah.
And the paintings are en route, so it's like once as I know the paintings are there, the frames will arrive too, and then they put them all in. Then I'll be like, all right, I can like breathe, but I'm still a little like, oh, I hope they put them all in one box, and hopefully that box makes it.
Yeah, I totally get it. Shipping work is one of the less fun things that we all have to deal with as artists.
Very expensive.
Yeah. So, there's so many questions. Your body of work is pretty much all the theme is for Paris, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty much Paris.
So how many times have you been to Paris? Why Paris? Gosh. Tell us a little bit more about Paris.
Yeah. I studied abroad in France in high school, and I was north of Paris about an hour and a half in a town called Amiens, which everybody's like every French person is like, why would you have chosen that? I'm like, I didn't know. And it was a city that was totally bombed during World War II.
Wow.
And so except for this tiny little area of the center with the cathedral, it has Notre Dame Cathedral that makes Paris Notre Dame look like a joke. I mean, not really, but it's gorgeous. It's so much more ornate. It was built just after Notre Dame in Paris, and so it's got like, it's taller. It's big. I think it's like 3 times bigger even. It's crazy. Anyways, so that it had that, but like I would go down on weekends, take a train for $20 to the Louvre and go draw in the sculpture garden there and like visit Paris. And I mean, Paris is very, has that romanticized idea of it. And it's much nicer being in Paris when you speak French, which I learned French, because then you don't, like, the French will be like they're very proud of their language. So if you don't know it, they don't have a problem with correcting you. And us as Americans are like, that's rude. But to them, they're like, no, you said it wrong. Why would I not correct you? But we would never correct a foreign person who made a mistake,
Yeah.
But yeah, I just frequented it a lot when I was there. And then since then I go back, like I've been back, I really don't know, maybe 12 times. I don't know, sometimes it's multiple times a year. And I for the last 6 years, I've been going back to the same apartment, which is in the 18th arrondissement up on the hill, and it overlooks the city. And I stay in an apartment that has this terrace, and I just go out and paint, and it's like such an amazing inspiration. So a lot of these paintings have that view, but they're just really large.
Yeah.
And it's kind of documenting, the last 6 years of kind of going back to the same spot, feeling at home there. And so I really do love Paris, and I would move there. I mean, I've thought about it, and I've threatened a number of times, but I'm like just too scared to actually do it, I think.
Oh, I think that's awesome, and what a neat experience. I've never painted in any foreign place before, or even been to Europe.
Really?
Yeah, I know. I'm an uncultured swine.
You are, well, I was going to say that, but no, I would love, like, my dream is to go with like an adult who's never been to Europe and just see it for the first time, because it's like, it's mind-boggling of how beautiful the architecture and cities are, and it's really amazing. Yeah. So I hope you get to go.
Well, it's funny because as I've seen a lot of those paintings, and personally, it's like, it's beautiful, and that view of Paris that you have showing over those rooftops and the different times of day and weather, and also like it's a pretty awesome inspiration for sure from my side of things. Yeah. So
Well, that's good to know, even someone who hasn't actually visited there. But that's another thing. It's like you never know what's gonna like change your career or like have such an effect at a later date. Like when I first stayed there, it was like, wow, this is amazing, and I felt just like lucky to see this view. I'm like, I'm just recording it. Like I don't feel like I'm doing anything. It's just there, and I happen to be there, and to get to go back and to realize like, yeah, 6 years later, I get to have a solo show with the work inspired by that. Like, just for anybody who's starting out, you never know what effect something you do in this moment is going to have in the future. Like, and just be open to it, because your dreams will be a part of it, you know? And it's maybe cliche to say, but it's been true.
Yeah.
You know?
No, like that's really inspirational. So let's shift gears just a little bit here. You talked about the workshops that you did with John Poon.
Yes.
Are there other artists that you studied with, and you know, maybe you can name some names and talk about some of the things you learned? I think one of the things in this podcast I really want to focus on is showing that there's multiple ways to do this thing. And I think that sometimes university is the way to go. And I think that
right.
I had an exceptional experience when I went to university and had that experience. And it was a wonderful foundation that it sounded like you didn't get that kind of foundation that I did with traditional composition, drawing, things like that. So yeah, talk about some of those other workshops and some of the other artists that helped you and what that looked like.
Yeah. Like you said, there's so many avenues to really do what you want. And there are actual universities that still focus in realism. So you just do your research and find those if that is the route you'd want to go. But the workshops for me have been just so informative and really shaped who I become as an artist. So John Poon was the first and kind of like that biggest foundation for me. But then after a while, like if you've taken workshops, you realize everybody's talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
It's all like based on like, you got to learn to draw, you got to learn to see value, you got to learn to see color, learn atmospheric perspective. And so the next, I've taken a couple workshops, and I would encourage anybody, all these people I'm going to say, like, they're incredible teachers and have so much information to give. So the next was a woman by the name of Maggie Siner. Okay. She lives part-time in Venice and then part-time comes back to the East Coast in like Virginia area, and will teach workshops over on the East Coast. I met her randomly in Venice, Italy, through like, I just met this person on the street when I was painting who was like, you have to meet this person. They're like, oh my gosh, you need to meet Maggie, she's a painter. And then Maggie and I became friends, and I took this amazing workshop from her. So after that, then I became friends with Daniel Keys. Well, I actually had to take his workshop to become friends with him first. So I paid the dues, literally paid to go take the workshop. And then Dan's, and it's funny, everybody's got a totally different style of teaching. Dan has so much information and teaching out there, whether it's you can go to one of his in-person workshops or all of his online content, and just a wealth of information. Yeah. And the best part is everybody who's gone through this kind of realism journey of art making, everybody so far has been so incredibly generous. And I think it's because they receive that, and so they just want to give that back, no matter how big their name is, no matter how famous or whatever they might be. Everybody is just like, no, I would love to give you some shortcuts that took me forever to figure out, because at the end of the day, everybody still has to do it, and it's hard. Yeah. You still got to be the one to draw. You still got to be the one to see color, but like everybody is very willing to share information that they've gotten. So, those were the biggest three, I would say.
Yeah.
And then really like painting from life. I know it's like, I'm just realizing how much more important it has become for me. Like nature will teach you so much. It'll humble you so much. Like you go out, even to this day, I'm like, I painted 1 million landscapes. I go out and I'm like, all right, I know how to do this. And I make the worst painting. And I'm like, whew, okay. All right. Get off your high horse and yeah, it's such, it'll never stop teaching.
Yeah.
So
Mother Nature has a good way of kicking us on
yes,
our butts and
yes,
telling us who's in charge.
exactly. Yeah, or a live portrait model, like nothing like that, to just, if you're not focused that day or for whatever reason, and you're like, oh, it will show very
Oh
quickly.
shoot. Oh, that's great. So how did you get started selling your work? What did that look like early on? How did
Yeah.
all of that come about?
So this is something I really like. There are those few people that, yeah, at a young age, they just are already like on the cover of magazines. Like that's how Dan was. It was like very quickly cover magazines and that notoriety at 20 something. And that's great. That's not everybody's, like that doesn't happen that often. And so I would encourage, Ken and I talk about this all the time, but just encourage everybody. Yeah, there's these big galleries that are, sought after. And yeah, I want to have my work in Legacy or Arcadia or whatever it might be. And yeah, that's a goal. Maybe you apply and you get in, but great. Nothing bad about that. But I would advise anybody to start in their own community, start local. Like nothing is too big, nothing is too small for your art. So the first place I did show art was in the coffee shop where I was working. And I put 5 big landscape paintings up right after a John Poon workshop. I just was like, all right, I'm going to paint all these big plywood boards. Had them up for a month. I come in one day and they're like, dude, some guy from Oregon came in and bought like 3 of your paintings.
Wow.
And then this one's going to sell, and this one, they all just sold. And I was like, I charged $250 for a 2x2 foot painting. I was just like, no way. And then a friend of mine was like, my mom has a gallery in this little town called Big Fork. Like, I bet your work would go great there. They saw my work, like, oh yeah, we'd love to share it. Then I had a show, sold. So I just started local. Like, I really want to encourage people, like, just be humble. No place is less than to just show your work, because so many people are going to walk in, even a coffee shop. And I know coffee shops are not, there's a stigma of like, the art that they might have in there, or that it's low, it's too low for me.
Yeah.
Just start in your community wherever you can and take what's working and move forward, and opportunities that you never know where that next little person who sees your work is going to come from. They get coffee too. They go to the grocery store too, so there's probably more support in your community, and it's probably the best if you want to stay there. It's like a great thing to build as a foundation too, because even to this day, I can still sell art in this community. And I do feel lucky because we are a resort area. So there's a lot of new construction and a lot of wealth in this area. So that I know not everybody does have. Find where you can start, and closer the better, I would say.
I really like that. With my experience, I landed in Cody, Wyoming, of all places, as a high school art teacher, and there's an art league over at the Chamber of Commerce, and that's kind of where I started getting my feet wet. And there was like a little paint out that they had one day, and I was out in the park just painting a landscape from a photo. I wasn't even painting like what I was seeing in front of me, but I had a couple other things there that I had painted, and some people came along, and it was like a little 9x12, and I got $150 for it. And I was just thrilled, but I think the concept is more along the lines of just get out there and get it in front of people. Mm-hmm. Like go through the process of framing a painting and getting it out there, and serendipitous things happen. Like,
exactly.
It's just things when you get out there, things happen. You make connections, you meet people, and if they're not gonna like buy art, they might know somebody who will, and like it gets that ball rolling, and then it turns into this massive momentum. But it has to start somewhere.
Exactly, it really does.
And I think getting past that first door, that first barrier is kind of the hardest one, because that's the catalyst to get it all rolling.
Yeah. I mean, I know so many artists that I didn't ever really have this, but like actually terrified to show their work. And I get that. Like as a musician, I'm terrified to sing in front of people still. And like that's so scary, but like so I get that feeling where you genuinely are like, oh, I don't think it's good enough. Like this is actually scary. But if you really do want to do this as a living, like you got to confront that. And like, yeah, you have to get people to see it. You have to get it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that little bit can make all the difference in the world. Yeah.
It does. It really does.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about your painting process. It sounds like you do a lot of plein air. But obviously you've been painting a bunch of paintings that are all Paris based, but you're not in Paris, obviously you're in Montana. So yeah, explain kind of how you work and maybe how your work has evolved.
Yeah. So it was really important for me, especially in Montana where it's cold most of the time, to develop a studio practice. Because like I'm such anymore, I'm like, I used to love the snow, but I do not like being cold anymore. So I'm like, I'm not going out painting. It's not nice. But so yeah, like all these months in the winter, it's like you gotta have a solid studio practice. So I used to paint out on site, and I would come back into the studio and try to, whatever ones I thought were good, I would try to make big, and I would literally like go like try to draw the same exact painting and make it like way bigger. And every single time Ken and I both would do it, and it would just like backfire so bad. We're like, why is this not working? One, our drawing would be off, and two, you just cannot get the same freshness of a piece this big where a brushstroke covers the whole sky, when on a something that big you have to paint like a million brushstrokes to fill the same area. So developing different techniques of like, okay, how do I cover this ground in a large scale? And one of the best practices, and again, I would not have done it had I not been sharing a studio with Ken. He's all about like, he's like a machine. He's like, you draw, you do this and this, and you get this. And I'm like, yeah, but what if you want to just like, I just want to get in there, feel it. And he's like, okay, do it. And I do it. Sometimes it works, but most of the times it would just be like, it would take me forever to finish one because I'd just be like, oh, it's not right. Oh, it's not right. And it was really because the drawing was not right from the beginning. So I have adopted things that are not in my nature, but it has helped me for the better for sure. And I do little value sketches in pencil and paper. Let's see, like really small ones. And sometimes I've even scaled the drawing exactly how I'm going to make it. But like these like little tiny sketches. I don't know where'd they go.
Those are awesome. Would you be willing to share some of those with us? Like just little snapshots that people could look at?
Yeah, like take a photo of them kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'll share them in the show notes.
They're pretty little, like, they're pretty little drawings, and they're just fun. They don't take that long. And I'm not really a great drawer, I would say. Like Ken's an incredible draftsman. But I do that, and then I will have an idea of the composition that works, and then I do a small painting, and then I figure out the drawing, color, the value, and then if that painting works, I will literally transfer it with a grid to a larger canvas, like this one behind me. This was a smaller one too, and I then start painting my process, which is very different than plein air because there's multiple layers. But a lot of times I'll do this underpainting to get the values, and then all I have to do is put color over the top of it, the drawings in, the values in, and I get to really focus on the color and then the texture and then the feel of the painting. So, studio practice is absolutely important, and it is so necessary for me to like. The biggest help is like gaining a tool belt, like a set of tools that like I know I can kind of like see the painting before it's painted, be like, okay, that's a big vast plane that like really has nothing going on the small one. It doesn't take much to do a few brush strokes, but like how do I make that interesting them? So I plan in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna actually do a gradation of slight temperature shift from left to right, or let the underpainting show through and have a thin layer here, to make interest. So there's like all these little, and they're all just techniques, so anybody can learn them. And that's like, how do you put them all together on the painting? So, it's a little bit of how I.
That's cool. How does because you go and do plein air. How does plein air inform your studio work?
Yeah. So now I did it this year again. I was like, oh, I like this plein air. I'm gonna make a big painting of it. Just failed again. And Ken was like, wow, you did it. I was like, dude, I haven't done that for years. Why did I do it? So now I really just separate the two. Plein air is great. It teaches me, it informs like how light works. But when I'm in the studio now, I don't think at all. I don't use my plein airs to be like, oh, I'm going to make this light effect even. They're really just like, this is just like filling me up in some way technically to go plein air painting. Sometimes I get a great piece that I feel like is art. And then the studio pieces are really, they have to be a totally different painting now. Like I do not try to make the same painting.
Yeah.
But they inform the understanding of how light works and how paint can be applied to mimic that.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about your palette and your tools?
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like there's nothing too crazy. It's pretty traditional. I use brushes. I have a couple palette knives that I do use quite a bit, but I'm not like just a palette knife painter, just brush painter. And the palette that I work with it's become much more extensive because I started working with doing floral paintings, and with flowers, they're very saturated. So it's really helpful to have a wider range of colors. But when I'm landscape painting, like, you could really get away with a super minimal palette, especially just to understand how color works. And for the longest time, I just use white, burnt sienna as an earth tone, and then cadmium yellow, cadmium red, and ultramarine blue.
Wow.
And you can like mix pretty much most of the natural colors you see with that. Now, all the other colors are just shortcuts.
Yeah.
And there might be now ones that I use like transparent oxide red, transparent oxide brown. I get these super rich, deep darks with those that I couldn't get if I just use ultramarine and burnt sienna, but you can get close. And then, viridian green I have on there now, just these like cadmium orange, all these secondary colors, and then like yellow ochre, but there's nothing too wild. I've been using ivory black a lot, actually, which I love because it acts more like a blue.
Yeah.
I treat it like a earth tone blue. So I kind of have an earth tone that would be technically each of the primaries. So like transparent oxide red and brown are more of a red.
Yeah.
What are the other ones that I have?
Yellow
ivory
ochre.
Black would be a blue. Yellow ochre would be a yellow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But then, I use rosemary brushes because I'm good friends with Rosemary and that all of them over there, and I love their brushes. So I just use Rosemary's and everybody is always at like that is I'm sure you get all the time. What brush are you using?
Right.
And it's like, let me see. It is a extra long flat color. I use a lot of those. Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about, because I personally use flat brushes, and mine are they're a synthetic flat that's a little bit softer than like a normal hog hair, hog bristle. And I just started using them a few years ago, and just kind of got used to it, and then now I love it. It's just that's how I apply the paint, and so maybe talk about the variety of tools that are out there, and how different artists can use different things, and I don't know, explain that here from your perspective.
Yeah. I use a lot of flats too because I feel like they're really versatile. Like you can shape them more into a filbert shape or point, or use the edge. Do you find that?
Absolutely.
Like, kind of versatile. You can get the square, like big, broad brush stroke, but then you can turn on its side and get a edge, or you can like twist it in the paint and make it pointy. So I use almost all flats too because of the versatility of them, I'd say. But then it really does change with like the material and the length of them and how dense the bristles are. And so I do have like a range. I have some really like soft ones, and then I have some like gnarly old hog bristles that like I've had from the very beginning of painting that I still use. Like there's two that I have, and I hope I never have to throw them away, but I use them almost on like every big painting. Cool. And I'll show you. Yeah, so these would all be flats, and like this one used to be flat, but it's turned into a filbert because I just like scrub with the side of it. But it's like the amount of paintings this has done, it's crazy.
It's awesome.
And then all the way down to these like really more like long haired, they're comber. So about right there, a lot of the hairs are pulled up further, so they will make like a really soft wispy edge if you feather it. This was a larger one, and this one's brand new, so you can kind of see where the bristle, like right in here, they're kind of like a lot thinner at the top. But I think like you really could paint with anything. It's just a matter of getting used to what you use. And yeah, these have an effect that you can get. You probably, you can put the paint down and then kind of fan it out, and it creates this nice feathered look where you can't really do that with hog bristle, but you could lay it down and then scrub one of the edges to make it softer, right? So if you're doing the same thing, it's going to give you a little bit different look for sure. But you could really paint anything with anything. I can't remember who the painter was, but it was this landscape painting. I think he's a dead artist. But he painted this scene. He didn't have any brushes. He went out and he painted it with a stick. And then he came back and painted the same scene with his brushes. And the one painted with the stick is like phenomenal. Wow. I'll try to figure out who that was. I can't remember who was telling me about it, but I did look at it. I was like, oh my God. So like tools, I don't want to get people like they have to be too concerned about getting the right brush, the right tool. Like you said, Mark, you work with it long enough and you get used to it and you figure out what it does and how you like to work with it. And you kind of then stick with it. And you might grab a new brush here and there, or a new color, but like, I don't know, you get the basics and you can find your own handwriting with it.
Well, I know a lot of artists that have explored with different tools. I've seen artists get these giant trowels, like, and just do these massive, like they're spreading their painting out, like they lay down the paint and just spread it out and just see what happens. And like, there's so many ways that you can approach oil paint. And I think it's so easy to get limited in our kind of little box of how everything is supposed to be done, or this is how I was taught and this is the right way. And and there's just so many right ways to do it,
There's so many right ways. And like, I would suggest anybody like find a painter that you like, whether they're living or deceased, go see their paintings in person. And then you can try to figure out how they did it. How they put the paint down, because that's all it is. It's just a technique of how the paint went down. Is it layers? Is it direct? Is it with a trowel? Is it, with brushes? What kind of brushes maybe? Is there glazing over it? And you can like one of the artists that I really have always admired is Brent Cotton. And I remember I'd see his images and actually before I didn't know a single person in the art world. And I was in France and I was like, I want to paint landscapes. I was missing Montana. And I just Googled, I don't know, oil painting Montana. And I didn't know at the time even it was Brent Cotton's painting. And I did a little watercolor rendition of this like fly fisherman in the river. And then as I came back and years went by and I got into this art world, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was Brent Cotton's work that I was like randomly found back in the day. And then when I got to see one of his paintings, and I would like look at it and be like, how does he do that? Like, oh my gosh, the feeling, the light, everything. And then I saw one in person one day and I was like, oh my gosh, that's how he does it. And it was just like illuminating and like, okay, this is a tool I can have to put paint on this way. So emulate, like every great artist, like steal or whatever, but emulate. You're going to learn so much. Nobody owns anything. Nobody made all the things up on their own. we all take from people who came before us and people we like. So find the people you like and try to see how they've done it. And you're going to find your own voice. Your handwriting is going to develop. It's going to happen.
Yeah. You know, there's a book called Steal Like an Artist. And I'm sure lots of people that are listening may have or may have not read that book, but it's a really short book, but it's valuable to get your mind around that mindset, that, you know, trying to paint like somebody else is okay. And being inspired by other artists and the way that they apply the paint, there's nothing wrong with that. I think you're going to get into issues when you're trying to copy somebody and then sign their name and claim that it's one of theirs. But you know, if you were to draw a 5-point star, like just hand drawn, and if I were to try to copy it, and I could take an hour trying to copy it exactly, but it's not going to be the same. It literally will not be the same. There's no way for me to reproduce 100% that same little 5-point star. And so the beauty is that even when we're trying to copy people, we're going to be making something that's uniquely ours. And so,
yep. I love that idea. That's such a great illustration of 5-point star.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, it's just a simple concept, but like, I think we have these weird ideas and these rules or these unspoken laws that are kind of floating around there that some artists adhere to or they're really sensitive about. And I think so like if you're going to go out and try to copy somebody, you know, and their work, you know, I think as artists, we have a lot of these weird ideas or rules that are kind of unspoken or, things that we're facing that it's like, well, I can't do that because that's not how it's supposed to be done. And really nobody should be making your rules as an artist and vice versa.
Right.
And I think we need to go through the process of determining what do I value, like what's important to me, like, and like, can I feel good by creating this? Like, do I feel like I'm being honest and treating other people fairly as I'm doing this? And, you know, and base it off of that. But some of these, you know, ideas that are floating around out there about how, like, this is the only way you should do it, or, you know, there's definitely right and wrong ways. And I agree that, like, in extreme situations, that's true. But for the most part, we don't have to adhere to these in the box thinking, you know, like, get out of the box and really explore and steal like an artist.
Yeah, I totally agree. That I want to read that book.
Yeah,
you know who it's by?
I'll have a link. I'll find it and I'll put a link to it in the podcast. But I can't remember the name of the author right now. So,
that was one of the biggest kind of aha moments for me. It was probably like 2018 or something. I'd been painting for a good while, but I was still just like struggling, like, oh, who do I have a voice? Like, what do I want to paint? How do I want to paint it? And I was looking at, you know, these different artists, and I just realized one day that, okay, if I like, so Brent Cotton was one of the first ones. I was like, oh my gosh, if I could paint like Brent Cotton, that'd be perfect. Yeah. And then I find other artists, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this guy named John Singer Sargent. If I could paint a watercolor like he painted Venice, like, that's all I would want. And then I find Jeremy Lifking. yeah. Then I find Jeremy Lifking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I love how he handles these textures in these fabrics and the way he can depict this, like, such razor sharp exactness, and it still feels like a paint. Oh my God. And so I realized I had multiple people that I would have loved to paint like, who've all made their own mark. Yeah. And I realized one day, I'm like, okay, so if I want to be like all of them, I literally cannot do that. But I must too have something in me that can make a mark. Like, I must have a voice as well. Like, I can't ever be anybody else, and I can't be these multiple people. So there's room for my voice as well. And that was just like a really big kind of aha moment of like, okay, I can, you know, emulate coffee, but I don't have to be any one of those, but I can love them, and I can love all of them, and I can realize I have a voice and develop that.
Yeah.
And it was already happening, even though I didn't
Yeah.
know. Like people are, oh, that's a Richie painting. Oh, that looks like a Richie painting. I'm like, how do you, I don't know,
Yeah, it's kind of a strange phenomenon, but I totally agree. I really started off just geeking out on everything that Greg Beacham did. And then I see other artists like you said, some of the old masters or other contemporary artists that I'm just like so inspired by and excited about their work and how they handle the paint. And I start to try to imitate in some ways, like maybe it's like, in their thin passages, I would try to make it look similar to that. And over time, it just turns into your voice,
Right.
And I think, I think people can see Greg Beacham's influence in my work, just, with the texture and things like that and a lot of the palette knife. But overall, I hear people all the time nowadays, they're like, that's a Mark McKenna, that's a Mark McKenna. And it's like that voice emerges as we just keep at it.
It totally does.
And it's interesting. I've been, lately I did a different painting for me, which is a much broader landscape with some animals in it rather than big animals with a little bit of landscape. And it's interesting because at least once or twice I've already heard like, this still feels like a Mark McKenna,
Right.
And it's like, it's because that's how I handle the paint. And it's interesting. It just develops over time. And I think we can forget about trying to force the voice and allow it to just emerge over time. And as you get several years under your belt, that just happens. You just work hard and eventually your voice just starts to sing.
Yeah. It doesn't happen though if you don't create a bunch of paintings.
Right. Exactly.
You just got to create. It's going to happen. But if you just are paralyzed by it, it doesn't have a chance to grow and evolve.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The quantity will allow the quality to emerge.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm asking pretty much all of the people I'm interviewing is if you could go back to you, kind of when you were getting started and you had to give yourself some advice, whether it was one or two things, what would that be?
Okay. I kind of alluded to the idea of like being kind to yourself, less critical maybe. This is kind of in line with that, but I still I'll go speak at like high schools and job fairs and stuff, and I will tell this because it is changed my life significantly, not just with art. But so as you're learning, especially painting, it's very hard. And you get to places where and at the beginning, like you can have these like huge growth spurts, and then inevitably you get to these plateaus, and the plateaus even sometimes go the other way. And you feel, I don't know how many times at the beginning, like I would show up and be so frustrated. Like I've lost it. I can't paint anymore. Like these aren't working. I'm not I can't, I would just be so upset with what I was able to do because I'm painting on site and go landscape painting, and it'd be a week after week. I'm like, okay, I officially have lost it.
Oh, no.
Like I got to now find another career. But that's kind of jokingly, but Ken would argue the other way. And it's like, no, we both went through that. We're like, this sucks. Like nothing's turning out. Like people aren't responding to things, and I hate these pieces that have come out. And I was in Paris one time in the middle of one of these like long fits of just like painting horrible. I didn't even want to start painting. I became so fearful. I didn't even want to break the palette out because I was like terrified to even put a brush stroke down because they would just immediately get frustrated and be like, it's bad, it's wrong. Because I would try, but I kept going back. I'm like, right, I'll do it. I'd make another bad painting, and it was so hard and mentally hard. And like as a painter, I don't know if you can relate to this, but when you have a really good painting, like your day is like, oh yeah, this is awesome. But when you have like a really bad painting, it's like, whew, I gotta dig myself out of this. Like I have to clear my head. Like I'm not my painting. I'm still a good human,
Yeah. I've been there.
But yeah, right. So I would go through these waves, and then inevitably I'd find myself up here again. But my friend Dan Keys told me this one time. We were in Paris, and it must have been so miserable being with me. I was in such a sour mood, and just like depressed. Like I would get depressed about it, even because it's my livelihood. It's like I put so much of my identity into painting, which another thing, removing my identity from painting. I've learned to do that.
Yeah.
So when it does go bad, I'm not bad. The painting is objectively not strong. Great. Figure it out and move things around. Anyways, Dan said, did you ever think when you're going through these times, you're actually growing? And I'm like, no, this sucks. I suck. You watch me make 10 bad paintings in a row. Like there's no growth. And he's like, okay, just humor me for this, for right now, and take this as truth. Just for a couple days. You are going through a place where your eye is seeing way more than what your hand is capable. Now, you come to those times when you make a great painting and they align, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I know what I'm doing, and inevitably your eye will start to see even more. You'll start to see more nuanced things. And then you'll realize you don't paint that way. And then you realize, oh, I need to grow. And this is all happening internally, maybe subconsciously. And then you go through these times where you are not satisfied because your eye is beyond where your hand is. And it will take maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, however long, your hand will catch up. And in that time, it means you are growing because you're not satisfied anymore. And you're searching. Now, how you react to that, I reacted with like frustration, depression. It was awful. But what if you just knew that that was going to pass and you were going to hit this next place? And I was just like, did not want to admit he was right at all, especially at that point. So I was like, okay, I will entertain this. The next day, I do a bad painting. I'm like, see, I suck. Bad paint. Next day, another bad painting. I think it was the third day, and I was like, all right, I will keep showing up though. I'll keep painting. And I got there, and we sat in front of the Louvre, these gardens, and for some reason I just was like, okay, I see a painting, and I just started, put down a stroke, and the painting just especially after what I had experienced, it just fell into place. It was such a joy to paint. I got done, and I was like, Dan looks at me, he's like, see? And I'm like, this is a good painting. It's a really good painting. And then after that, the painting just got better. I went to England. I was painting portraits in the studio. This is actually a painting from that. I paint, and I want to do more of this because this is a sweet little
that's
piece.
Awesome.
Like I was painting things I never paint, and they were just like turning out, and I was just on fire. I was just rising again, and eventually I did hit that. But ever since that point, whenever I've hit that, I let it just happen. Yeah. I don't fight it. I don't beat myself up. I know I'm growing. But the thing is, it applies to everything I do.
Yeah.
And I actually need to listen to this to myself right now with what I'm going through. It's like, yeah, the hard parts, they can be hard, but if you don't fight them, know that they're not going to last. Know you're growing. You will get to that point where you're riding that back up.
Yeah.
And so that happens a lot, especially when you're beginning, because you're learning so much. And knowing that has just helped my mental health significantly as an artist, because you're up against yourself. You have nobody else. Well, you have people who maybe buy it or not buy it to tell you if it's good or not good, but you're just up against yourself. It's such an interesting career and way to spend your time. And no, I don't know of any other career that's quite like it in that sense. And that's a challenging thing to be up against yourself all the time.
Yeah.
Especially when you're really self-critical, like I really was. So, that would be my words of wisdom.
I like it. I really appreciate that. And I think we all need to hear that. That's a wonderful lesson about our eyes progress faster than our hands. And it's funny. I don't think I've ever put it in those terms before, but I can look back and I can see those moments, and I've got a family that I'm providing for, so it's like I don't have an option to quit painting or just to bust through it, but like that really gives it meaning. And it's crazy when you understand that what you're going through has purpose, especially if it's hard. Like, it makes it so much more bearable.
It does.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's say Richie Carter has to start over. Like, nobody knows who you are, but it's today. It's 2024, and I love this question because it's like, if you literally had to start over with like 100% fresh, nobody knows who the heck you are. Like what are some of the things that you would do to kind of, but you still know what you know.
You still know, right? Okay.
What would you do
easier
to get started?
I would make an online presence. So I would build a website and a social media, even though I hate social media, especially like it's doing something weird right now. Like, the algorithm has gone crazy. And as I'm preparing for the show, I paid for an ad about a month ago. And since then, because I'm not paying for ads, it is not putting any of my work up on people's feeds. Like, it's limiting it so much, like to the point I'm getting like just over 100 or 200 likes on things when I haven't got that since like for years.
Wow.
It's just like, so anyways, I don't like that part of it. However, to get people to see your work, it is great.
Yeah.
So I would make an online presence. It is valuable, even though I complain about it. It is valuable. And let's see, that's a really good question. I would just keep painting and getting out there and being out, meeting people, painting, because I'm also not one to go and apply for galleries. Like, I've never done it, and the one time I did, it was like, no, I don't think you're a good fit. And I was like, oh, cool, great. But it was a little like, ow. So
that hurts.
I've never done that, and I just put myself out there, and you meet people I take opportunities when people actually offer something, I take them up on it. So I would just kind of do that route. I wouldn't, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing to go put a portfolio together and, submit it to a gallery, but I wouldn't do that myself.
Yeah.
It's not me. I don't thrive off of that. But yeah, I would probably use social media to just start building something, because I know artists that are not doing the traditional gallery route who are killing it. Like, killing it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe that's tempting, but I love working with galleries, and I love that it's a space where people can come see the work. But I would just start letting things do what I want, know that it's good, and let things kind of start falling into place as I kind of been lucky enough to do, I feel.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful. Maybe that's like, oh, really? Like, you're just going to throw caution to the wind and just hope something falls into your lap. But it's like, I don't know. I put myself out there, and I hope people respond, and people do.
Yeah. Well, and I think kind of going back to the initial conversation where it's like you start doing stuff and things will serendipitously kind of fall into place.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so much believer in that.
I agree. And I think that that's valuable for anybody in here. No effort goes really wasted. I think that every effort you put into getting yourself out there, even if from the outside it looks like it flopped, you're learning in that process. And all education comes with a price, period. And ultimately, like, there's no way around that aspect of having to put yourself out there. It's just reality with being an artist.
Yep. And that looks different. Maybe putting yourself out there is going to a gallery and showing up with work. I know most galleries actually don't like that, so don't take that as do that. But
Yeah.
It's going to look different for everybody, but that's...
Yeah. So if people want to find your work or they want to see the show, and actually by the time your episode gets on, I think your show will have already happened. So
but it might still be up. It'll be up through May.
Perfect.
But I don't know when you'll put it out, but sorry to...
No, you're good. You're good. But tell us, how do people find you? Do you have any kind of, like, do you ever teach workshops, or, what kind of stuff? Like, we'd like shamelessly self-promote here.
Okay. I'm going for it. So, Instagram is like the most updated, like, you're going to see what's up to date going on, even on the daily. Like, you probably don't want to see most things. I'm like, I'm getting coffee today, or I'm making a cake or something like that. But Instagram is great, which is Richie Carter Fine Arts. My website, richiecarterfinearts.com. And then I have work in a number of galleries in Montana for fine art in Whitefish, Montana. Cassin's Fine Art in Hamilton, Montana. And then Old Main Gallery in Bozeman, Montana. And then work in Arcadia in New York. And that show will be up from the 9th to the 26th. So if you're in New York, you can see that in person. Otherwise, I will be sending out a newsletter of the full show. So if you go onto my website, you'll get prompted to sign up for a newsletter, and I'll send a whole thing out there. But those would be the galleries to see in person. And I do teach workshops. I usually teach a couple every year. Unfortunately, none in Montana, though I should teach a landscape workshop here in the summer. I don't know why, because people would love to come here. But I teach in the wintertime at Scottsdale Artist School. So I think next February I'll be teaching one.
Nice.
There. Sometimes it's floral, sometimes it's landscape. And then the cool, really fun one that's happening this year is in Sicily in September. I'm teaching two week-long workshops back to back. You can take one or both. And I'm modeling it after, John Poon, of how the information of how he taught it, and then Maggie Siner, who I took a workshop from, and I did this week-long Southern France workshop with her, and it was like magical. It was like all-inclusive, all the food. It was just painting all day. Like I just want to give people that same experience that I had. So we're going to be in Sicily, and it's really I don't care what your level is. Like, everything I teach goes for everybody, and I work one-on-one with people where they're at. So the Sicily one is going to be exceptional, and it's really not. I would promote it, and I wouldn't think about how much it was, because in my head I'm like, oh, it's going to be like $10,000. It's actually really, really reasonable.
That's awesome
for people. So go on. I'm actually going to get it onto my website, the actual updated information on that, and link to the website where you can sign up. And so, come paint in Italy with me, and maybe in Nashville in November, but I haven't lined that up yet.
Well, that sounds amazing. That whole thing in Sicily. Wow. And just
come, Mark, you need to go to Europe.
I think you're right. I think I do. And it'll happen one day. It will. I don't know when, but it'll happen. So, good. Well, thank you so much, Richie, for being on the podcast and for sharing all these wonderful experiences. I know we could keep talking and talking. There's so much that we could cover. But I think that, to keep it as compact and I think we'll end here. But
that sounds great.
By all means, best of luck at your show with Arcadia. And I hope that as people are hearing this and it's already happened, you're probably sold out by the time people are seeing this.
Probably. Gosh, I hope.
So I wish you the best on that, and I guess we'll chat again soon. Thanks again.
Hey, Mark, thanks so much. It's great being on here.
Well, happy painting. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. We would love to have you join us every week as we interview incredible artists and gain insights from their personal journeys to success. If this has been valuable to you, please subscribe and share it with your other artist friends. We'll see you in the next episode.